On this episode of Newt's World, on June 24th, 2022, Gianno Caldwell's life was forever changed when he lost his 18-year-old brother, Christian, an innocent bystander, to senseless gun violence on the streets of his hometown of Chicago. Christian was a young man with a bright and promising future, and one of over 150 people murdered across the United States on that day alone. Think of it. In his new book, The Day My Brother Was Murdered, My Journey Through America's Violent Crime Crisis, Gianno describes his deeply personal experience with urban violence. He dives deep into the heart of America's big cities, telling the stories of 8 other murders that occurred on the same night his brother died, shedding light on the tangible human tragedy while providing readers with valuable lessons, insights, and a roadmap for creating safer communities. Here to talk about his new book, I'm really pleased to welcome my guest and good friend, Gianno Caldwell. He is a political analyst for Fox News Channel, the founder of Caldwell Institute, a bipartisan firm in Washington, D.C., providing strategic advice and counseling. Gianno, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
It's an honor to be with you, Speaker, as always.
Describe your brother Christian. What kind of person was he?
Well, my brother Christian, he was 18 years old. He was innocent when he was murdered. This is a kid at 16 years old, begged me to take him on a college tour because he wanted to focus on what was next. So we went to UCLA, where we did a tour there, and, we talked with other schools as well. But this is somebody who was focusing on his future. This was somebody who enjoyed sports, friends. He joked a lot. Just an overall good kid. It's such a tragedy of what happened, but I will hold with me dear the memories that we had, and we had many of them.
How did you hear that he'd been killed?
My sister calls me on the morning of June 24th, and she says that Christian has been killed. And I said, well, how do you know that? What are you talking about? Where did this happen? Where's this information coming from? And she said someone called her and told her, and then we sent someone to the scene, and they talked to the police and said he had been sent to a hospital. So we had a little bit of hope that he was still living at that point. But when we got to the hospital, in my family, they wouldn't give them any information. So I ended up reaching out to some elected officials I knew in the area who made some calls, and they confirmed that he was at the hospital, and they also confirmed that he had passed away.
And what did the police tell you about the killing itself?
Well, the police told me that he was not the target. There was an individual, and this is one of the theories of the case. The police is giving me the same theory, and I've talked to someone else who told me about this when I initially heard. Apparently, what happened was there was a fight between 2 guys that took place 6 months prior, and one of the guys got beat up really badly, and it was on tape. Somebody recorded it, and they put it on social media. So the guy who got beat up really badly wanted to kill the guy who put it on social media. So 6 months prior, they tried to kill him. This guy runs away to California, comes back thinking the coast is clear, and they saw him out. My brother happened to be standing next to him along with some other folks, and they shot everyone, but my brother was the only one who happened to die that day.
I almost hate to ask this, but what was your feeling? What was your reaction personally when you learned all this?
Well, you know what? When my sister called me, and I just didn't believe it. I couldn't believe. We come from a very faith-based family. We believe in the power of prayer, and it's something that I grew up with. So I'm saying to myself, there's no way that my brother could be dead. Maybe he's injured and he'll recover. I told my sister, let's pray right now. And there's a scripture that says he shall live and not die and declare the works of the Lord. And, that's what we did, but it was too late. He was already gone.
As I understand it, he's standing there and a black SUV pulls up. Several people get out with guns and just start firing into the crowd.
That's correct. And the individual that they wanted, they shot him a bunch of times. He still lived. My brother was shot maybe once or twice. And then there was a young lady that was shot. And this individual that they wanted is just honestly miraculous that he survived. He had to have multiple surgeries that day. And then weeks after, he had to have multiple surgeries. But my brother it's just hard to fathom. It's been 3 years since this happened, Newt. 3 years, and it's still hard to think about. The only thing that really gives me a sense of purpose in his murder is me having started the Caldwell Institute for Public Safety, which our focus has been George Soros funded and backed district attorneys across the country. And now we've expanded out to gubernatorial races, mayoral races, because I know for a fact that the reason that my brother was murdered and people across the country, you mentioned on that day, is because of soft on crime policies in many of these large cities. We've seen it time and time again. Soft on crime isn't just a policy, it's an ideology in which the criminal knows that there's not going to be any punishment for what they do. We see it in New York City. We've seen it in Chicago. We've seen it in Los Angeles, where we got involved in the George Gascon race there, supported Nathan Hochman, who's now the district attorney. We did ad buys, all kinds of stuff to ensure that Nathan Hochman would win that election. Because it's one district attorney at a time. We got to pull them down, and we got to bring those local municipalities back into good conscience, good governance, and law and order.
Gianno, one of the things you do is you talk about 8 other murders from the day your brother was killed. Can you describe briefly those 8?
Yes. I talk about people like James, who's my first chapter, Army veteran, who had PTSD, couldn't sleep at night, so he would often go to a park, do a walk in a park at 2 a.m. On one particular night, June 24th, that day, he goes to the park. It's a bunch of kids out there, teenagers, some even younger than teenage. And he says, "Hey, what are you kids doing out here this late? You should go home. It's 2 a.m. They end up killing him with a traffic cone. Terrible set of circumstances. I talk about someone named Catherine, who was a mother, grandmother, 65 years old, chemical engineer, white woman out of Texas, who was going home from work when gunfire broke out on the freeway. It was a drug deal that went bad. The guy who was selling the drugs was trying to rip off the guy that was buying them. They were trying to rip each other off. They jump in the cars. They run out on the highway. She's coming home, and they end up killing her. Baby Cecilia, 6 months old, who was murdered miles away from my brother on the same day, June 24th, of course. This baby, 6 months old, was murdered next to her baby brother in a car seat in Chicago. You know, we often talk about being at the wrong place, wrong time in some of these cities, but honestly, thinking about Chicago, you can be in your bed and a bullet comes through your window. It's no safety and security there.
I think for people to understand the scale of what you are responding to beyond the immediate personal anguish of your brother, in 2022, Chicago alone had 630 homicides and 2,600 shootings. It seems to me you really got drawn into dealing with and exposing the scale of the problem on a nationwide basis.
Thank you for that. These consequences of policy making and these feckless politicians who, like Brandon Johnson in the city of Chicago, who supports many of these criminal activities, and by doing so saying things like, don't demonize these kids. Well, if these are the kids that are shooting people, then why wouldn't you demonize them? You know, at some point, they're not children. They're acting as adults. They're murdering people. And this is the reality that we live in. If they're 14 or 10, they should go to jail if you're going to pick up a gun and kill someone. But we have to focus on tougher sentencing, punishing those who commit these crimes, ensure that soft on crime policies are no longer on the books. We need to talk about fathers in a home because a lot of this stuff can be stopped if we focused on the family structure. That means, in what I really appreciate about you, Speaker, because you've done this with Bill Clinton, when you put together the 96 Welfare Reform Act, making people go to work or get educated. Those are extraordinarily valuable components and tools that bring a person to the point where they can have the independence to do things on their own. It gives you confidence. It gives you a sense of worth, a sense of pride. And that's largely missing in many of these areas.
I was really surprised as you did your research, because I've always thought of murder as the one thing we really focus on clearing. Your work indicated that only 59% of the homicides in 2021, only 59% were solved, that 41%, almost half of all homicides, go unsolved, which has to make the criminals more confident that they can do it and get away with it.
Exactly right. And especially in places like Chicago. And when you look at these numbers even deeper, and when they break them down by race, even less, way less of the African American numbers are actually solved. And that's in part because of this no snitching policy that's been in place for many, many years in the African American community, where you don't talk to the police and inform them on a crime that took place. So what does that do? That leads to many cases being unsolved, unresolved. That leads to many families never seeing justice for their own loved ones because no one's willing to talk. And that's another thing that I talk about in this book, The Day My Brother Was Murdered, My Journey Through America's Violent Crime Crisis, is we must work with the police. As a community, for many African Americans, that is necessitous. Because at the end of the day, it used to be, and where I was growing up, if you told, then something may happen to your family. But if the gang found out who did the crime, they would turn the person into the police or they would handle it themselves. Now, if you tell, you don't tell, you're in the same set of circumstances. Something could happen to your family. So I'd rather be a person that's willing to work with the police and get their protection and their guidance and to solve the crime than to allow there to be a set of circumstances where this person who killed your family member goes out and kills several others. And that's what happens in many of these areas is the shooter. One particular person is committing a lot of these crimes. We saw that in New York. I remember when the New York Post came out with a story on a lot of the crime that was being committed was by like 200 or 300 people in the city. The majority of the crime, it was insane. But that ends up being the reality in many cases, that you have people who do it over and over again because they've gotten away with it.
How much of the difficulty in some neighborhoods comes because people are just frightened that if they do testify, that they and their family will then be targeted by the very same forces of violence?
I think that does play a part. And that's why I think is in some of these jurisdictions, we know that the Democrats went out and took a swing to defund the police, etc., when the police really need more funding in many of these locations. But I also think they need funding for witness protection. That's important. That's an area in which we don't often talk about, and why people like Mayor Eric Adams was talking about raising taxes for migrants to take care of them. He should be ensuring that the tax base he already has is being rightly spent on the folks who are Americans and who need the help, protection from the police. They need to make sure that these budgets are where they should be and they treat the police fairly, because these are the people we rely on for our safety and security.
One of the things you reported is that the Department of Justice indicated had been a 55% increase in violent crime over 4 years, with an amazing 75% spike in 2022. And then you went on, the U.S. Department of Justice in September of 24 reported an overall 55% increase in instances of reported rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. And the estimate was that only 40% of violent crimes are reported to the police. Why would people not report a violent crime?
Well, in some cases, I know in some cases people think it's not going to matter. As an example, in Chicago, they need 2,000 new police detectives to handle their current murder workload. So those murders that are happening in the city, they need to be able to solve them. They don't have enough police for that. And in some cases, they may not come. And that's the unfortunate reality. Police now, in some cases, they don't want to be demonized. They don't want to make a quick decision to save a life that may cost them their job or cost them their reputation. That's an issue in and of itself. We have a nation where people have been unfortunately scarred. They've seen what happened in 2020 with George Floyd, and that was an issue. Police departments are overwhelmed. And we continue to see that uptick in crime in 2022, which is rather interesting in a way because, you know, we had already surpassed the riots and all those different things, but then that was a policy issue. As an example, in Illinois, there's something called the Safety Act, SAFET Act. And what it does is it ends cash bail in the state of Illinois. But there's other policies that it impacts even more directly. As an example, they have these ankle monitor bracelets that you've seen people wear them. They're on house arrest. That's what it's usually for. Well, in Illinois, they sometimes put murderers on house arrest as they await trial. Well, with the Safety Act, now you can go out and murder the person who may be the witness to the crime because the police are not allowed to come to your house for 72 hours. So it used to be, the monitor goes off, the police call, are you home? And then they may stop by to verify that you are home. In this case, 72 hours, you got a full runway to go do whatever you want. Police cannot respond. And then in 72 hours, they can finally respond. So you've already done all the dirty work at that point.
Why do they have this 72-hour rule?
That's a really good question, Newt. And I'm going to tell you, I went out for Fox to Chicago because when you look at the list of things this covers, threatening a public official, that's something that's been decriminalized in a way. Many of the things that were in that law, people did not believe it. I say, hey, what do you think of the new Safety Act that the Democrats are proposing? You tell them you go down the list. They say there's no way that this can be true. Absolutely no way. People who vote for Democrats and are Democrats said there's absolutely no way. And then people found out that it was absolutely true. It was accurate, and they passed it. They ended up passing it. J.B. Pritzker put money behind it. The billionaire governor of Illinois, who's so far left now, he's a progressive, is what it seems to me. And how did it pass? I mean, you got an electorate that's still voting for these kind of people. That's how it passed.
It's kind of amazing to me. It's almost as though the modern left is pro-criminal, that they adopt a series of procedures and a series of rules, all of which are to the advantage of the criminal and to the disadvantage of the victim or the innocent citizen. You cite Chicago, which is your hometown. You get the same pattern in New York or in California. In Philadelphia, as you know and have written about, the district attorney, Larry Krasner, is just insanely soft on crime. And a lot of these folks were supported by George Soros, who in one election alone put up $1 million to help Krasner win. And yet Krasner is clearly openly in favor of the criminals and against the police and against the victims. I mean, how do you explain all that?
I'll tell you, it's not that they seem that they're pro-criminal. They are pro-criminal. That's the reality of it. They have been pro-criminal for a long time. And, they went under the guise of criminal justice reform. It was a noble effort, righting some wrongs. But what it ended up becoming is justice for the criminal. And that's where we are as a country right now, because people, they saw a moment with George Floyd and they thought it was a welcome mat to say, listen, we're going to be in favor of the criminal because we think that our voters would like it. In some of these major cities, they did like it until they didn't. You think about California. Remember, just last year, there was the repeal of Prop 47. Now, Gavin Newsom, and for people who don't know about this proposition, in 2014, it was a ballot initiative which lowered the penalties for crime, criminal activity. So you get less time for this, less time for that, decriminalize this or that, etc. So folks know that crime exploded in California after George Floyd, especially in places like Los Angeles, and they wanted something done about it. And they thought the proposition was one in which wasn't helpful for that time. Gavin Newsom was against repealing it. He said, oh, this is going to hurt our black communities. What? How dare you even say something like that? Black communities are being hurt because of crime. So you need to put those folks in jail. 100%. So that's the modern left today. They don't want to repeal it. The voters did. Thank God that they did, because it's such a shame that they allowed it to go on for as long as it did.
I mean, you point out, for example, that in Chicago alone, the progressive prosecutor, Kim Foxx, dropped more than 25,000 felony cases.
Yeah, including rape and murder.
I mean, just basically said to these folks, you're free.
Yeah.
Sending a signal, of course, to other people that they can get away with rape and murder.
Absolutely. You
had mentioned that during Gascon's term in San Francisco, property crime increased by 49%, and 60% of the arrests made by the San Francisco Police Department were just dropped by Gascon in his office as if they'd never happened. I mean, how can people put up with that?
Well, George Gascon is, I think, a really good example that you just referenced, because he helped author that proposition, which lowered the penalties statewide. So that was a big part of his formula. And he's also someone that George Soros backed, supported for not only some of the roles that he did in San Francisco, but he also ran for district attorney in Los Angeles County. So he's a really interesting fella, and thank God he's no longer in office. And I'll tell you, for a lot of the people they've seen, and I'm African American, I think many people know that about now, but there has been some wrongs in the African American community, for sure. But you don't right them by saying we're going to give criminals a free pass because many of these criminals happen to be black, if I'm just going to be plain about it. That's been the case. Many of the victims happen to be black. The perpetrators oftentimes happen to be black as well. They do this thing to pander to African Americans and some Hispanic and then some liberal, I guess, well-meaning whites who think that black folks, the only way to help them is to allow criminals to get off the hook, which is asinine, to be clear. And that's part of the reason that they've done it. But I think people are, in some cases, waking up to this. I wouldn't say the same for some of the good folks in New York who are willing to put a socialist in office as mayor. I don't understand how something like that happens, but I guess if you're in pain and you're suffering under the weight of the financial burden of being a New Yorker, maybe you're willing to do whatever you can to try to take some of that burden and pressure off of you. Maybe that was a part of the calculus for some of those voters, even though it was a very low turnout race. This idea that you can cure all ills in the black community if you just let criminals off the hook, and it's just totally wrong.
You make a point that you can't really explain the rise of the progressive, pro-criminal, anti-victim district attorneys without looking at George Soros's role. Were you surprised by the scale and scope of what Soros has done?
You know what? I'm going to tell you, I'm very surprised. And honestly, what he did was, it was an evil genius idea. Instead of going nationally and putting all his money in nationally, he go locality, local, he funded over 75 soft on crime prosecutors, candidates that ran for office. Many of them got in, and he only put in a little money to do it. And then he created a trend across the country. One city did it, the other one adapted. And that's how they played it. And then I find out through the work of Elon Musk and Doge, how much his nonprofits have been receiving in federal funding. So now the question becomes, obviously you can't use federal money for politics per se, but many of them do. Like we see these protests, et cetera, that they hire. And I talk about that in the book, The Day My Brother Was Murdered, My Journey Through America's Violent Crime Crisis. Many of these protesters are bought and paid for through Soros. And he uses money through his charities to get them in these particular places, like these ICE protests they did in Los Angeles, these riots and the looting that they did. Much of this stuff is paid for by George Soros, but we were really surprised to find out that they were receiving all this money from our very own federal government through USAID. Now, that was the real shocker, I think, for a lot of people. So he may not even be using his own money to do a lot of this stuff. He's using our money, which is the biggest slap in the face for many Americans.
So in that sense, what President Trump has done in cutting off the flow of that money to basically anti-victim, pro-criminal DAs is a significant step in the right direction.
100%. And there's others, too. You got people like Stacey Abrams. What was it, $1 billion that her charity was going to receive, and it was open for a month?
It's impossible for me to believe that she could possibly spend that kind of money intelligently. I was stunned. It was kind of like, Christmas, let me give you a gigantic gift. Good luck.
Yeah, 100%.
I want to shift gears because I think one of the most provocative comments in your book, you say the greatest violent threat to Black Americans is other Black Americans. I mean, that's a very provocative point. What do you mean by that?
Well, just like I mentioned the numbers in terms of us dying at the hands of each other, 100%. And I've been a conservative for 2 decades, well over 20 years. I think I might be coming up on 25 years now at this point. And the people who really were opposed to me being a conservative were Black people. People who disparaged me for being a conservative, more likely than not, African Americans. And folks, when it comes to the work that I'm trying to do, once they find out that there's a Republican association to it, that's when they demonize or attempt to demonize our work, when we're just simply trying to save lives. We're trying to turn the country around, put it back on track, and a law and order posture. We want to make sure that there's safety and security for everyone. But more than likely, they're opposed to it. And the reality is many on the left, whether they be white, black, or indifferent, it can be something that's the greatest thing ever, the cure for cancer. They find out Trump is a part of it. Then all of a sudden, they're against it. And it's reprehensible at this point that we cannot just be a free-thinking society of people, no matter what color you are. People make their own decisions. So long as it doesn't impact me in a negative way, it's fine. But certainly a lot of us are dying at the hands of each other. And that has become, I think, a sticking point in many of these communities. And that's why many of us just leave these communities.
You make a very important point that poverty by itself doesn't explain the violence, but that there are much deeper breakdowns in family, education, and opportunity. What can be done to break that cycle?
I think we need to get back to family in the homes because we're, I think, a society that's been largely lost. I think that's part of the reason that Donald Trump's win was so decisive, because people wanted to go back to some form of normalcy. And they thought he was the only sane person to run. Between him and Kamala Harris, this was the only sane person that you could vote for at that particular time. But we got to get back to the core root of family and education, Newt. And I think that's the most important thing. We got to get back to that. We got to get back to the value of hard work. That's why I support work requirements on welfare. And I appreciate what it appears to be Congress has that same mentality and mindset. And, hopefully we'll see that in the big, beautiful bill. That is the hope. But if we can get back to our roots of family, faith is also important, extremely important. I interview a guy in a book who runs a network of charter schools, and these are underprivileged students that he has in his particular schools. And he says that it doesn't matter what the religion is, whatever it is, you can be Jewish, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, whatever the case may be. He said, if a kid has some sense of faith in their life, I believe he said it was like a 75% chance that that kid was going to do well in life if he had that core of faith in his life. And I believe that because that's why I grew up. I grew up with that. I grew up knowing the difference between right and wrong, knowing that, God is here to protect us and guide us and lead us. The 10 Commandments, which I think the governor Abbott of Texas now is putting them in every classroom, now has to display the 10 Commandments. If we can get back to those foundational principles, I think we'll be a society that can get back on track for sure.
One of the steps that you've taken, you've been very outspoken against the defund the police movement. What do you think's been the real world impact of that movement?
I think a lot of cities recognize right away that it was a disastrous decision to defund the police in any capacity. And many of them decided to put the funding, prop the funding back up, et cetera. But it was very problematic and it impacted our officers in a very deep way. I mean, our officers began to believe that as a society, we really actually don't care about the police. And some of these cases, we see police officers get attacked. I think it was in Times Square, a migrant attacked one or two police officers and he was out of jail the next day or a couple of days later. These policies, the rhetoric from elected officials do have consequences. The unfortunate reality is the morale in many of these local municipalities, these local police districts have gone way down. Retirements have gone way up and people just don't want to deal with it anymore. And that's not okay for us as a society to have our officers feeling like that because we depend on them. We need them.
I really think that your book is very impressive in the range of things you cover. The need for a serious continuing prison policy initiative. When somebody goes to prison once, we would like to make sure when they come out that they're prepared to re-enter society and not go back to prison. Talk for a minute about that whole notion of how do we reduce what they call recidivism, which is simply people getting out and being sent back to prison.
Yeah, the recidivism rate is extraordinarily high. I know that it was at one time 75% after 5 years, people recidivizing and going back into prison because oftentimes prisons become a place where people get more educated on how to commit more crime. Except for an example that I utilize in the book, Dr. Bill Winston, who's a pastor out of Chicago. He is actually my pastor, 20,000 member church. And what he does is he has a program that goes into the jail. They teach them financial literacy, job skill, readiness. They bring corporations into the jail to recruit prisoners, those who are about to get out. So you want to ensure that they have the skills that are needed so that they do not recidivize when they come out. If you got a job or a skill or something, somebody's going to take you in, then you're less likely to be in that set of circumstances. I think programs like Dr. Bill Winston is one that should be expanded throughout the country. They did a wrong. They're accepting their punishment, obviously, by being there, and they don't have a choice but to. But now we can give them skills that when they come out, they're in a better position to be effective citizens and taxpayers. And I think that's what we really would want as a country. We want to be able to give people the ability to do right after being in a set of circumstances like that.
One of the reasons I wanted to share this conversation with folks who listen to our podcast is that after the death of your brother Christian, you founded the Caldwell Institute for Public Safety, which is a nonprofit dedicating to ensuring a justice system that prioritizes the safety and security of all law-abiding citizens. Could you talk about that for a minute, too? I think it's a very important organizational effort on your part and one that I have great admiration for.
Well, thank you. People can go to caldwellinstitute.org and learn more about us there. So what happened, Newt, is I wanted to ensure that after what I experienced with my brother, working with the police, I work for Fox News, so I had all the press, but many people don't. I put together manuals, and people that are on our board of advisors did the same. We have former prosecutors, police chief, legislators, etc., that are on our advisory board. And they put together a manual on how to work with police and prosecutors. I put together a manual on how to get press for your family members, how to work with mental health services. Dr. Drew put together a manual on that. Those resources can, again, be found at our website, caldwellinstitute.org. It was necessary. I wanted to really help people because I didn't realize that I was going to go through all these things and have these particular sets of experiences, but certainly I did. And I want people to have an easier time, unfortunately, I'm saying that, to navigate this situation because it's incredibly difficult, hard, and emotional. So the Institute started off as being a place for that, as well as going after soft on crime, George Soros funded prosecutors. And now we've expanded our tent to get involved with the gubernatorial races, the mayoral races, because public safety and crime is an expansive area where it's not just about the DAs, it's about the governors, it's about the legislatures, but the governors have a great impact, the mayors have a great impact, and the DAs have a great impact, especially if they're actually applying the law and not utilizing politics. So this institute, I think, is extraordinarily important, is the only one that's on the right because we don't really have these same kind of issues that they have on the left. And I just wanted to give a place for people to be able to get what they need during their time of need.
Well, I think you're doing an amazing job. I really want to thank you for joining us. It's a very personal story. You've responded with great courage and great discipline. I appreciate your sharing your story about your brother Christian. Your new book, The Day My Brother Was Murdered, My Journey Through America's Violent Crime Crisis, is available now on Amazon and in bookstores everywhere. I encourage everyone to get a copy. We will list the Caldwell Institute for Public Safety on our show page so people can come and see what you're doing. I just want to thank you personally, Gianno, for the commitment you've made as a citizen and for your friendship.
No, thank you for your friendship. And we got tour dates coming up here. They can go to caldwellinstitute.org and see what city I'm in next.
Thank you to my guest, Gianno Caldwell. You can get a link to buy his new book, The Day My Brother Was Murdered, My Journey Through America's Violent Crime Crisis, on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.